This is the Observations Podcast for Sunday, the 3rd of November, 2024. We are waiting momentarily for Michael to come on. While we're waiting, I'll go ahead and tell you that we are planning on doing a live election night webcast and watch the returns as they come in. We'll be starting at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific, so it'll be after the polls close. We should know relatively quickly after 9 p.m. what is going on and what the election looks like. So, the actual length of that podcast may vary. It may be quite a short one, or it may be quite a long one. I'm not entirely sure how long that is going to last on Tuesday night, but we will be doing it on Tuesday night. And we will be doing it live. So we invite you to join us for that day after tomorrow, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern, as we go live. Once again, we'll take a look at Decision Desk and Real Clear Politics and wherever else we can find election results coming in that won't get us in trouble by displaying on a live stream. So no Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, because I'd hate to have the channel struck with a copyright strike, but we'll find something to look at, and we'll be able to talk about it throughout the night as the election results come in. Hopefully, it won't be a very long night, and we'll be able to know what is happening fairly quickly. While we're waiting for Michael to show up, speaking of knowing what might be happening, and honestly, I'm not sure if we can look at this and say we know what is happening. So here are the most recent polls that have come in. The TIP came in, well, actually, going back to Emerson, it came in as a tie. TIP came in with Trump +1. Now, this is nationwide vote, so this is just a broad sentiment gauge. New York Post coming in as a tie, NBC News coming in as a tie. All of these have come in the last 24 hours, which brings our Real Clear Politics polling average, which has been fairly accurate in the past because they take high quality polls and they simply average them. And that should help, de-weight any of the outliers or what have you. But honestly, other than the ABC News poll that came in on the 1st of January, this poll done by Ipsos that showed Harris by up 3, it looks as if in the last week or so prior to the election, we've seen a movement towards Donald Trump. Is that movement true? I don't know. And it looks like Michael looks like he's here. So let me admit him. And that way we can bring him on as soon as he comes up with camera and sound. I think it's important. Well, let's take a look at some other things. Then we'll talk about what is important. If we look historically at what has been happening, and there he is. Hello, Michael.
Hello to everybody.
Good to have you with us, as always. Let me add you to the conversation here on the screen share. There we go. So if we look back historically, and 2020 is such a weird year. I mean, can we both agree, Michael? I think that 2020, because of the weird stuff that happened during that election, that it's not...
as far as polls went, as far as electorate turnout, everything was weird about that year. I mean, it was the year of COVID and all that other stuff.
However, Clinton was 1.8 points up at this point in 2016. Trump is now up by 1/10 of a point. She was well up in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Florida, although she certainly didn't win Florida, but it was closer. He's well ahead nationally, even though Well, he's well ahead of where he was in previous election years. He was down 7.2 to Biden in 2020, down 1.8 to Clinton. Now, he won against Clinton by a very narrow margin in the Electoral College. Not against Biden, but now he's up. The polls have tended to underestimate him for some reasons that we'll talk about, and especially in this election for reasons that we'll talk about. But in any event,
it's just not. It's not just him. It's Republicans in general that they tend to underestimate.
Yeah. So if we look at the Electoral College, still with toss-ups, Real Clear Politics has Nevada, Arizona, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia all in as toss-ups. I don't think that's true. So I would prefer the no toss-up map. And on the no toss-up map,
that looks a little closer to Kamala's best case scenario. Maybe she picks up also in North Carolina.
Well, if she does, then, well, I don't want to do that. Let's go to create your own map. So we'll create our own map based on that. We can play around with it. If she picks up North Carolina, then this becomes a very close election indeed. Assuming that she wins Michigan and Wisconsin.
Yeah. And that she absolutely takes New Mexico. She has to take Colorado too, I think.
Yeah. So if she wins North Carolina, if we take a look at Real Clear Politics, and here's the trouble with the Real Clear Politics poll. The results that we see here are, again, just the RCP average. If you're up by 1/10 of a point in the RCP average, they're throwing the state to you.
Right.
1/10 of a point is an awful narrow margin. I mean, no matter how much you cut it, that is so far within the margin of error that.
But it's also,
it can go either way.
This is a polling average. This is not an actual poll.
Yeah.
And there are a bunch of outliers that get thrown in there. Somebody just had Virginia being a 10-point favorite for Kamala. That's not even within the realm of possibility.
Well, in Iowa, they just had a poll.
Oh yeah, that's the other one, right? Yeah,
that their paper released that says Kamala Harris is ahead by 3 in Iowa. I don't know of anybody who thinks that is actually true.
No, and then you look at the crosstabs, and they've way overestimated the Dem count. So comparing it to the 2020 exit polls, which I think were like D+3, they've got it D+9. Like, what?
There are a couple of problems. First of all, there's the general problem with polling, in which we talk about polls as if they're polling the electorate.
Mm-hmm.
They're not.
No.
They're polling a bunch of people who say they're going to vote. You know, I mean, some polls just do registered voters. Some polls do likely voters.
Right.
Okay, but just because somebody says they're going to vote, I mean, you know, maybe their kid has to go to the hospital. You know, maybe they get hit by a truck. I mean, yeah, they say they're going to vote, but are they? And
well, plus, I mean, the typical sample size is about 800 people, which is a good sample size if you're going to do a statistical analysis. That's actually a fairly good, if you keep repeating it over and over and over.
The thing is, the electorate,
it's still only 800 people.
Yeah, but it's even worse than that, because what we're doing is we're getting a sentiment at a point in time of people we think are going to vote. But that's still not the electorate. The electorate doesn't exist until the polls close on Election Day.
Yes.
Who is actually going to show up to vote? And one of the things that I think makes this even more difficult to predict is the mental model of who the electorate is going to be that each campaign is constructed. Because the Harris campaign has decided that their outreach needs to go to high propensity voters, people who always vote, who are reliably counted on to vote. They think that in that group, their numbers are good enough to win them the presidency.
Yeah, they skew very hard female, a little bit older, a little bit younger. So like, the middle, they're not bothering with as much. Certainly minorities, but they're not doing very well with all of those demographics.
Well, unmarried women, they're doing very well with.
Unmarried women is who they're doing the best with. Yes.
Yeah, they're pulling like 60% of unmarried women.
Get married, bitches.
The Trump campaign has decided that their gold mine are in people who regularly don't vote.
That's how they won in 2016.
Yeah, it's the people who basically want to be left alone and who really don't want to pay attention to politics unless they absolutely, positively feel that they have to. And that is where Trump thinks his electorate is. Those people who don't really want to be part of the political process. They would just like to be left alone.
Yes.
And Trump thinks that they can get enough of those people out to vote for him that will hand him the election. That was true in 2016. In 2020, with all of we made it so easy to vote that it really pulled in a very big number of high propensity voters.
And possibly dead voters. This
election, I don't know, because you don't know who the electorate is until the polls close. That's the only poll that matters. All of these polls are a measure of sentiment. The second
thing is that go ahead, do your second point.
The second point is we went through this in 2012. I've had a sense, just looking at the early voting numbers coming in, and in some states, Republicans are so far ahead of where they have been historically on early voting that it doesn't look good for the Democrats. I think they've cut into well over 500,000 votes in Pennsylvania in early voting over the normal Democratic advantage. The normal Democratic advantage there is usually somewhere around 900,000 votes, and they have cut that down to below 500,000. So they're like 460,000-ish behind in Pennsylvania. But that is a huge increase in those votes. And it does seem like we've seen sort of a seismic movement, sort of a preference cascade that at the last week has broken for Donald Trump. Maybe. The problem is that's what it looked like in 2012 too with Mitt Romney. And that turned out...
There were no shenanigans that went on in that election at all.
Yeah, and that turned out to be wrong. So I think that there is probably a 60% chance, if I was to predict, it's probably about a 60% chance that this is what the map looks like when the election is over.
I think that's pretty accurate, actually. And frankly, this might be a worst case scenario.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Trump. It could very well be that we're looking at something closer to this.
Yeah. I think that's a little more likely because, what I was going to say before is that those low propensity voters, those ones that come out for Trump and only Trump, are situated in that whole Rust Belt area. Kentucky, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Wisconsin. That's your Rust Belt. And those are the people who have been hurting the most. They've been devastated by the changes to our economy, the globalization. They have, lost all sorts of jobs and opportunities. They are definitely looking for something to change. And that's who, I mean, we watched it, but the night we watched uh the returns in 2016, we saw those Rust Belt states fall one by one, and we're like, okay, this is over before we
Kamala,
even got past the Mississippi.
yeah, Kamala Harris has to win North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, or
At
Wisconsin.
least.
She
Right.
has to win 3 of these 4 states. If
Right.
she drops Michigan and wins Wisconsin, she barely pulls it out.
Right.
But she has to take Pennsylvania and North Carolina.
And again, I think it all comes down to Pennsylvania. I think Pennsylvania is the watershed. Whoever wins that is going to win the race. Period.
Yeah, so those 4 states are where everything is, and it's interesting to see where the campaigns are in the last 2 days.
Mm-hmm.
Donald Trump is barnstorming North Carolina
And Virginia. He was in Virginia yesterday.
Kamala Harris is going to Pennsylvania.
And Michigan. And actually, I think she was in Wisconsin today, maybe.
Yeah,
Or maybe that was yesterday. I can't remember.
yeah, but I mean, her only thing that she has on schedule between now and the election is Pennsylvania. She's pulling a 2016 Hillary Clinton. They show up in Pennsylvania 2 days before the election.
25 times, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So that tells me they're not confident about Pennsylvania. But Trump isn't confident about North Carolina. The thing is, if Trump wins Pennsylvania, he can drop North Carolina.
Exactly.
And he can drop, in fact, he can lose Michigan, Wisconsin,
Yep.
and North Carolina.
Yep.
If he takes Pennsylvania, it gets close.
It's over.
But I think it's over if Pennsylvania gets called for Trump.
There are no close states for Kamala to pick up out west.
No, because Nevada and Arizona have both gone really strongly Republican this time out, and early voting numbers are through the roof in both states for Republicans. So
she has no bulwark out there.
Yeah, I mean, this whole thing is in Pennsylvania. Those 19 electoral votes are key.
They decide it.
Kamala can't win without Pennsylvania, even if she takes everything else. She can get close, but 15 and 16 electoral votes isn't 19. And she needs that 19. The only question is,
yeah, even with picking up the extra vote in Maine and the extra vote in Iowa, it doesn't get her there.
No, you mean Nebraska? Yeah, because this has all.
Excuse me, Nebraska.
Yeah, because she's going to win Nebraska too. Although I can't do it in this electoral map, which is kind of stupid. Oh yeah, I can. No, they've already got Nebraska 2 in there, and they've got Maine 1 in there. So
right,
all right. So that's giving her those 2 electoral votes too.
Yeah, it doesn't. Even in this close of an election, well, I don't think it's going to be this close. I really don't. But yeah, it doesn't. She has to have at least 2 of those 4 states: Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina.
I think it's probably going to look closer to this.
That looks a little more, a little closer to what I'm seeing. Now, here's the interesting: Virginia, where I live in Northern Virginia.
Actually, I probably should have swapped that. It probably looks more like that.
I don't know.
I think she's got a better chance in Michigan than she does in Wisconsin. The thing is, it's so close. And what if Trump is right? What if he is bringing a whole bunch of these low propensity voters to the polls? And the normal Republicans who normally vote on Election Day just show up on Election Day.
Right.
Then,
well, all I know is that there are a ton of ads on the TV right now from both sides here in Northern Virginia. That's really unusual. It's been very quiet since about August. And now all of a sudden, over the past week or so, it's started to ramp up. They're spending ad dollars here for some reason. I kind of figured Virginia was locked up.
Yeah, especially in Northern Virginia where you are.
Yeah, but I don't know. They're spending money here for some reason.
Well, I guess when you and I get together on Tuesday, we'll we'll just, we'll do it live and we'll see how it goes. But I'm on pins and needles as far as how
I'm also really looking forward for it to being over, but
so am I. I would love for it to end up with. There's probably about a 20% chance, I think, that Donald Trump ends up winning both the electoral vote and the popular vote.
yeah, I think this time he's got a better beat on the popular vote. Um, doesn't matter, but it'd be the first time that you'd have a popular vote and um electoral vote winner who was a Republican since
Bush in
I guess
2004.
George H.W. Bush.
No, George W. Bush got the popular vote in 2004.
No, he didn't.
Yeah, he did.
He didn't get it either time.
I thought he got it in 2004.
I don't think so.
Um,
If he did, it would have been 2004. He definitely did not get it in
he
2000.
did not get it in 2000. That's definitely true. But I think he did get it in 2024.
And Bill Clinton didn't get it either.
Also, for what it's worth, and I don't know how much it's worth, but just looking at the betting averages, look at how this is narrowed in the last 3 days. It's heading back towards 50-50. Trump is still up, comfortably by 9 points, but it was 10.6 points. It was 28.9 points back on October 28th. So,
well, then you had those weird polls come out.
Yeah,
Look,
but these
these
are betting markets.
I understand that.
Right.
But they're incorporating information that's out there, right? So they hear all of a sudden that there's some big swing towards Kamala. Well, they're going to change their betting. Nate Silver went off on the mainstream pollsters. He name checked Emerson College, of course, but he's like, you can't. There's no way that you can do that many samples and they all come out tied or +1. It's not possible. There's going to be some outliers in there.
Well, here's the problem, I think, and this is why Trump has outperformed polls in all of the elections that he's been a part of. I think Trump voters are harder to poll, just in general.
True, yeah.
They don't want to answer polls. They don't want to give their opinion. There is the shy Trump voter. I think that exists, although probably less now than at any other point in time. However, if you're going after low propensity voters, they have a low propensity to want to participate in polls either.
Right.
And so what I would expect to see on the polls. So it's well known that Trump voters are hard to poll and that they tend not to want to respond. If we know that, what I would expect to see are all of these different pollsters experimenting, trying different ways of weighting these very hard to poll pro-Trump voters to see if they can incorporate them into the polls. And since I would expect that to be an experimental process, I would also expect to see a wider variation in their poll results based on whatever experimental method they were using to try to pick up these, I guess we'll call them the shy Trump voters, even though that's not particularly true in this case. It's not people who, want to vote for Donald Trump, but who are afraid to say that they're going to vote for Donald Trump because they don't want to look bad. These are people who just don't want to answer polls. And so they're shy in the sense that they don't want to be poked and prodded by pollsters. The thing is,
there is a strong propensity for them to go for Trump, though.
Yeah, and the thing is, we're not seeing that weird variation in the polls.
Right.
What we're seeing are these consistent, very, very, very narrow polls, all of which, I mean, anything above 1% now looks like an outlier because everything is coming in, tie, Trump +1, Harris +1, tie, Harris +1. I would expect to see a lot more variance. We're not seeing
Yeah. I don't buy that closeness at all. And when you do see the odd, uh, you know, big gap, it's always in favor of the Democrats every single time.
Yeah,
It's just amazing.
Yeah, that Iowa poll just no one believes that Kamala Harris is going to win Iowa, much less by 3 points.
She couldn't even win it in a primary. She didn't even get a vote in a primary.
Yeah, so I don't know if this thing is as close as they say it is, and I don't know. But again, we've had this argument every year now since 2012 about polls. Are they trustworthy or are they not? Now, as it turns out, even though Trump outperformed in 2020, the pre-election polling appears in 2020 to have been relatively accurate. It appears to have been off slightly in 2016, underestimating Trump, and he won that election.
But it underestimated him by about the same percentage, about like 5 to 6 points.
No, it's not 5 to 6 points, but it is a good 3 points. There's a good 3-point underestimation.
I guess
for
it depends
Trump
on where you are, but yeah.
Yeah, well, nationwide it comes out to about 3 points.
Right.
And I don't see any evidence in these polls that they have been able to weight against that underestimation of Donald Trump.
Right.
So I think odds on this is Trump's to lose because I think Harris is just that unpopular. But again, who is the electorate? We don't know. And all of those people that said, yeah, we prefer Romney, actually just didn't go out and vote in 2012.
Mm-hmm.
Polls are a sentiment sample at a point in time. They don't really tell you how the election is going to go. And by the way, that's why they all have, 2.5% to 3.5% margins of error. Well, 3.5% margin of error, that's a 7-point swing.
Right.
between candidates. And they could still say,
and it's not uncommon to have it over 4.5, a little over 4.5.
Yeah. So
those, you're talking about now a 9 to 10-point swing. Yeah.
Yeah. And they can still come out and say, well, it was all within the margin of error. Well,
right.
Yes, that is technically true. You were within the margin of error, but it's not necessarily predictive, I don't think.
Or helpful.
So we're not going to know until Tuesday, and maybe not even then.
In fact, why do we even have polls? Like, why do they publish them? What are we supposed to get out of that? Like literally, what information does that give me?
Yeah,
that
as
I can use in my life.
The argument that some make, and I'm not sure I would make this argument, because look, pollsters only exist because people pay them to take polls, right? It's not like these pollsters are just going out and funding all of this polling activity themselves.
Yeah, they're not doing it for funsies.
So because it's a fun thing to do, people pay them, largely media organizations, pay them to conduct polls. I think you'd have to ask why the media organizations pay them to do those polls.
It's always felt like a sort of herding mechanism.
Well, see, that's the thing. What it does do is, or at least it has the potential to touch off a preference cascade, right? If it looks like your person is just doing too badly in the polls, well, why go out and vote for him? He's going to lose anyway.
Right.
And there have been some who have made the argument that the reason why these polls are so close is that they're trying to make it look better for Harris than it actually is, to try to to get people to come out and vote for Harris. If it's a very, very close election, you can make the argument you have to get out and vote. Everybody has to get out and vote. If the polls are skewed one way or another, so it looks like one person is just definitely losing, that's going to depress turnout for the losing side because, my person is going to lose anyway. Why waste my valuable time to go vote?
Yeah, right.
Although one could make the argument that the same thing happens if your guy is way ahead in the polls, right? You just say, well, he doesn't need me.
Right, yeah. They've already got it. I don't need to help.
So there is some have made the argument that the reason why these polls have been so consistently close, and when I say close, I mean close. Again, let's go back to the RCP national average and just look at how close these polls are.
Yeah, I don't buy it. I just don't buy it.
I mean, if you look at this is a 1-point election. This is a 50-50 election. I mean, out of the top, 20 polls here, 5 of them are ties. And an additional 4 of them are within a point. Is this election that close? I mean, who knows? Maybe it will turn out to be. But 48.5 Trump, 48.4 Harris. That's the polling average right now. Is this really a 0.1% election?
That's not what I see on the ground. It's not what I hear, around. I think Kamala is doing way worse and underperforming Joe Biden to a great degree. I don't even think she's getting as far as Hillary type numbers.
Well,
I think she's so underperforming.
No, she's not.
And that Trump is overperforming.
No,
I'm just telling you what I think. I'm not telling you what the numbers say. I'm telling you what I think based on what I see, not the numbers.
Just looking at what is happening in all the states that report early voting, this is just way behind 2020. I mean, substantially behind 2020.
Yeah.
There's just been a mountain of early Republican votes coming in that we didn't see in 2016 and certainly didn't see in 2020. Now, I don't think we're going to have as many absentee or, mail-in ballots in 2024 as we had in 2020, but we're definitely going to have more than we had in 2016. And how much of that is just because that's sort of the direction in which this country is going for mailing in rather than showing up on election day? I think we're probably going to see steady increases over time of mail-in voting. And of course, the difference is in 2020, Trump was specifically telling people don't vote early. Show up on election day, which does not seem in retrospect to have been a great strategy.
I don't know. I won't vote early. I just won't do it because, okay, now you got my vote, but what happens to it between now and election day? I mean, I don't know what happens. And all I know is it's not under my control. On election day, I vote. I put it in the scanner myself. I can see the votes counted. It's collected my ballot. And I'm done. I don't have to worry about some other person having to deal with it.
We have states that start voting as early as 60 days prior to the election.
Mm-hmm.
That just strikes me as insane. I don't like early voting, and quite frankly, I don't like absentee voting unless you have a valid reason. I would rather sort of split this down the middle, if you will, and just say, look, let's make everybody as happy as we can. Let's have a 4-day election that ends on Tuesday. So we got Saturday, Sunday.
Right. Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday.
Monday and Tuesday.
A national holiday.
Make Monday and Tuesday a national holiday.
Right.
And then say, okay, you have 4 days. You can't vote early. Can't vote 2 months early or whatever. That's just stupid. You got 4 days to show up and vote. And by the way, voting should be a little hard. I mean, it should be mildly inconvenient, because you should have some skin in the game. It should be important enough for you to take out a half an hour of your time in a 4-day span to show up, fill out your ballot, turn it in.
Or we can go back to the old way. You have to actually own real property in the state where you're voting.
I am not entirely opposed to that, but that will never happen.
Not anymore.
And if it did, Democrats would never win another election anywhere, which is one of the reasons why it'll never happen. But I think we should do something like that. Here's a 4-day national holiday.
I'm on board with the whole national holiday thing. That just makes sense to me. It doesn't even have to be 4 days. At least make it that Tuesday. Or if you want to make it that Monday and Tuesday, whatever.
Well, I mean, it would be a weekend and then a 2-day holiday.
Yeah. It's just, I am definitely down with making it a holiday to show that it's important. Now, what I'm really down with, what I'd really like to get to the point of, is how this is the least important election of your lifetime. That's where I want to get to. If we can get the power out of fucking Washington, then
wouldn't that be
these
wonderful?
Things don't matter.
Wouldn't that be wonderful? Wouldn't it be great if we could have a podcast that would concentrate on things like this? The Pilot Custom 823 fountain pen. Let's talk about that for half an hour. Let me show you a writing sample. That would be perfect. If Washington politics were at that level of importance, and we could have a podcast that discussed movies and popular culture and media, that would be great.
Well, we'd still talk about economics, though.
Oh, well, we could talk about economics all the time. We could just have a full-on monetary policy podcast.
To our 2 viewers.
Yeah, that's not the world we live in. In the world we live in,
I'm just so sick and tired of this is the most important election in your lifetime. And the problem is, right now, that's true. Unfortunately, that is true. I don't like that fact. I think it's an awful way to run a country. I think it's the absolute worst way to run a country, where every election is the most important thing ever. No, you need to be out of my life. So much so that I'm more affected by who gets elected dog catcher, not who gets to be my senator.
For nearly 200 years, we had a system in which the argument for voting in a national election was there is a possibility that at some point in the next 4 years, how you vote in this election may affect you.
Mm-hmm.
And we've gone from that to, if you don't vote, you're betraying the republic. The enemy will win. Well, it's the whole enemy thing. And just out of chat, and we are going to talk about this. So, yeah, good. Thanks, Jim. Bring it up in chat. Instead, we're going to talk about squirrels. Yes, you know what? We are. Because in Australia, let me start off this way. In Australia, it's illegal to keep a magpie. They're wild animals. They're protected. You can't keep them. And there were these people in Australia that found a sick magpie, nursed it back to life, and it just kind of...
They are nasty birds, by the way.
Yeah, but They're mean. It just started hanging out with them and became their buddy. And so they began to do, YouTube videos and stuff like that. Their state government in Australia found out that they were doing that. The feds got involved. The feds showed up at their house and said, you do not have a permit for wildlife care, and you have this magpie. It's not living in your house. This is not permitted. So, what can we do to help you get a permit for this magpie so that you can continue to take care of it? On the other hand, now that was a couple of years ago in Australia. On the other hand, this week in New York, The state wildlife finally figured out that these people that had this squirrel, Peanut, and also a raccoon, I forget the raccoon's name because Peanut, for
It
some
had to be
reason, has
Rocky.
been
Had to be Rocky.
Rocky the raccoon. Anyway, the state of New York found out these people had the squirrel and this raccoon, and they've been making YouTube videos for a couple of years. Got a couple of million.
Where is squirrel?
Got a couple of million subscribers. And of course, New York State Fish and Game, or Wildlife Protection, whatever they call it, descended on their house, grabbed their squirrel and their raccoon, whisked them away for euthanization, and killed them because these people didn't have a permit.
It's like right out of 1984.
By the way, the raccoon was Fred the raccoon.
Fred. Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, that's right. Actually, I saw that. Peanut and Fred. Yeah.
That's just insane. But when you talk about how this election is the most important election of your lifetime, the trouble is it's true. Because depending on who wins and what happens, there is every possibility that state or federal officials will come to your house, guns drawn, no-knock warrant, batter down your front door, and throw you all on the floor, shoot your barking dog, and whatever else they have to do because you did not have some sort of permit.
Right. And that's when, that's how it's just, wow, they're way too much involved in our personal lives, and it's been that way for a pretty long time, actually. But it was funny. I remember how Milton Friedman used to talk about, back in like the 20s and 30s and 40s, there was a lot of talk about freedom and getting the yoke of the federal government off of your off of your neck. And while they talked a big government game, the big government really wasn't involved in your life. It wasn't like a personal, yeah, your companies and the commerce and the market and whatever, they were definitely getting, hogtied by the government. But your personal things were not really affected by the government. And it's gone like from 0 to 120 like 10 seconds flat since then, to where now, like, they're involved in every decision you make.
It's one thing to make the argument that big government, like the 1970s, which was the Reagan argument, right? Mm-hmm. Government has gotten too big. It has gotten too much into our daily lives. And what he meant by that was that the regulatory power of the government had so expanded that it was becoming increasingly difficult just to start and run a business, because of all these rules that you had to comply with.
Although, oddly, it was Jimmy Carter who started the deregulation.
Yeah, exactly. But we won't talk about that. Jimmy Carter did not. Jimmy Carter did not gain any credit for starting the deregulation movement of the late 1970s. But you didn't have to worry about the government looking into what you were saying publicly.
Right.
Today, that's a worry. Today, if you say the wrong thing publicly, the government may actually go to Facebook or wherever and say you need to ban them because they're saying things that we don't like. And the government is now in the business of finding individual Americans who are saying things on social media and saying, hey, that's misinformation. You can be censored for that. I mean, in the wildest dreams of Democrats in the 1970s, they would never have imagined the federal government doing
that. Yeah, I mean, not since Woodrow Wilson and the Sedition Acts. I mean, they have not had that sort of power. I mean, the federal government has not had that sort of power. There was lots of pushback in the courts. We got some clarification of First Amendment issues in the 30 years after the Sedition Acts. What we're having now, though, is so insidious and behind the scenes. It's bringing private actors into the scope of federal government and getting them to do what they want to do anyway, but giving them the imprimatur and authority of the federal government. It's a disgusting collusion. Talk about corporatist. I mean, it's absolutely vile what these people do.
Perfect case in point. Last year, in January, in passing the National Defense Authorization Act, somebody shoved in some new rule that said that if you have a business, whether it's an LLC, a C Corp, or an S Corp, and we're talking about, at this point, 30 million different business entities. Business entities like mine. I run an LLC. We are chartered with the state of California as an LLC.
Like mine, with my wife.
Yeah, as you have to be. And by January 1st, 2025, you have to fill out a statement of information with the federal government telling them who the owners of your LLC or C Corp or S Corp. And look, if you have an S Corp or an LLC, look, the only reason that you have it is so that if something happens bad in your business, they can't take your house.
Right. It's a shield. That's all it is.
Right. The people who run S Corps and LLCs are basically trying to not to have a sole proprietorship where they have unlimited personal liability for anything that goes wrong in their business. So, okay, great. So you have a plumbing business that you run as an LLC. Well, if you do not, by January 1st, 2025, report to the federal government who the owners are, give them pictures of your driver's license and your home address and all of this other stuff, all, of course, to fight terrorism. Because if you don't do this, the terrorists win. And if you don't do it, it's 2 years in jail and a $500 a day fine. Just because.
And based on no authority. Like there's literally no authority here in the Constitution that would support this.
But this is federal law. And I guarantee you, of the 30 million people who have S Corps or LLCs, look, if you have a C Corp, you're probably not a
C Corp. You're already kind of, you're screwed.
But if you're running an S Corp or an LLC, that's generally a one-man business, or at least a very small business. That's 30 million businesses.
It's a pass-through entity. It is literally there to put a barrier between your business and your personal assets. That's really all it is.
And I guarantee you that of those 30 million S Corps and LLCs that are now caught up under this, and by the way, it's not just personal businesses. Your HOA probably runs as an S Corp or an LLC. I mean, there's all kinds of entities.
They tend to be a special
but how
entity of the state.
But they still have to report to the feds. They're still covered under this. How many of these 30 million entities, how many of those owners actually know that if they don't fill out this report and provide their identification and their personal information to the government, that they could be facing 2 years in jail and a $500 a day fine on January 1st, 2025? Probably a pretty large proportion.
I'm going to be honest with you, Dale. I didn't even know that. This is the first I'm hearing of it.
Oh, really?
I've not gotten any information about this, about any of the companies we own.
Let me see if I can. I actually wanted to put this up. Let's see, National Defense Authorization. So I'm going to do a quick search for it right now. The Corporate Transparency Act. There you go. Let me share that right there. And this is from the ABA. It's intended to provide law enforcement with beneficial ownership information for the purpose of detecting, preventing, and punishing terrorism, money laundering, and other misconduct through business
Under what
entities.
authority?
So there you go. So you have to report this to the Financial Crimes Information Network of the Department of Treasury. They will share it with U.S. federal law enforcement agencies, certain other agencies with court approval, to non-U.S. law enforcement agencies based upon a request of a U.S. federal agency, and with the consent of the reporting company, to financial institutions and their regulators. So
good luck. I'm not doing it.
So this all came in as part of the Corporate Transparency Act, and it was brought in under the National Defense Authorization Act last year. And so 1 January 2025, you have to make this report to FinCEN. And I love how
I don't think I do. I disagree.
And also, not just businesses, other similar entity that is created by the filing of a document with the Secretary of State or similar office.
This is all state level stuff. The federal government has no interest here.
Why do you want the terrorists to win? Why do you hate America and freedom?
I don't know where the federal government thinks it has this authority from.
Well, they passed it. And by the way, it's been in federal court several times, and
it keeps winning?
And it keeps winning. So 23 types of entities that are exempt from filing with FinCEN, basically.
Oh, then there's the types that are exempt. Oh, look at that. Unless you have given it the local office of your Democratic congressman.
Yeah. So there you go. Corporate Transparency Act. And you're now required to.
Here's the name and number of every single one of my members.
Yeah. So, and there is, I know it was 2 years in prison and $500 of per day fines. So non-compliance with the CTA is extremely costly and should not be ignored. The fine does top out at $10,000 and
well, that's good to know.
2 years in prison. So it's $500 a day, but that's only to a max of $10,000. So it's not that bad. And of course, you get to go to federal prison for 2 years.
That's only 200 days.
Yeah, it's the
you
law.
can get a full year for only $10,000.
It's the law.
That's just absolute bullshit.
So everybody with
and actually, you're right, Dale. That's an absolutely perfect example of the overreach of why the fuck do you need this information? Why are you making us do this? The non-compliance is going to be high, very, very, very high.
Because your plumbing business may be involved in international money laundering,
right?
And we have to know.
Mm-hmm.
And so every freaking plumber and roofer and framer and every other trade, bricklayer.
Yet if you named your business Jihadi R Us, you couldn't even get a search warrant. That would be discrimination.
But if you
why is it they always fuck with the people who are actually, compliant and like this country and want to see the country do well? That's who they fuck with.
Yeah, you know why? Do you know why?
Unceasing.
It's because they know that that's who will comply.
Right.
So you can say, we did something. Look, we now can prevent money laundering by getting all of this ownership information from every business. Because if I know who owns your business, that will help me prevent money laundering in some way, shape, or form. Somehow, knowing who owns your LLC will help me.
Underpants will profit.
Prevent terror. But you know what? People who don't want to spend $10,000 in fines and spend 2 years in prison are going to comply. And you can say, look at what we've done. We forced all of these businesses to comply to help fight terrorism. And it looks like you've done something. when all you've really done is burden probably the least likely sector of the American public to engage in terrorism or money laundering. The individual small business person.
I mean, gun control laws. Let's harass the actual people who follow gun laws. Speech laws. Let's harass the people who actually follow. They never go after the people who are actually a problem. They just go after the willing participants.
Well, if you go after the people who are actually the problem, I mean, people might, think
Complain.
that you're, some sort of racist or some sort of, otherist because you went after the wrong people. So, that's where we are. Now, I did promise you that we would have a short podcast today.
Yes.
And so because of that promise, I am now bringing the fader slowly up on our goodbye music so that we can leave this podcast early and we can come back on Tuesday for a live podcast. So
when are we going to come on to announce it?
I did announce it 6 o'clock Pacific, 9 o'clock Eastern. That's when we'll be on.
Oh, not until 9 o'clock. Okay, yeah. So there'll be enough polls closed by then that we can do enough.
We won't have to spend 2 hours trying to figure out what's gonna happen. Right. We can start seeing results come in, and then we can comment on that. So have a great Monday. I'll see you day after tomorrow.
All right, buddy. Bye.
And for the rest of you all have a great Monday, and I'll see you. Well, I won't see you, but hopefully you'll see me and Michael day after tomorrow. We'll look forward to talking to you then. Have a great Monday. So long.